Hollywood, in its golden years, didn't just measure stars by talent. It measured them, literally. In a world where a studio could turn a number into a headline and a headline into a career, the bustline became more than a body part. It was a weapon, a calling card, a ticket to immortality or exile. The flashbulbs didn't lie, but they didn't always tell the truth either. Publicists sharpened tape measures like swords. Columnists inflated inches as if they were box office figures, and a certain kind of woman, sharp-eyed, sharp-witted, and unafraid of her own shadow, learned to play the numbers game better than anyone else. These women weren't just bombshells. They were architects of their own myth, bending light, fabric, and scandal to shape an image the public couldn't stop staring at. Some lived in castles of color. Some battled censors with nothing more than a neckline. Some found that the biggest bust of all was the one the industry handed them when they asked for more than just a close-up. Tonight, we slip past the velvet ropes into a smoky banquet hall where diamonds glitter under chandeliers and tape measures hide in handbags. We will meet the actresses whose busts were so famous they became legends, sometimes bigger than the women themselves. And when the lights go down, we'll find out what they really left behind. Jayne Mansfield's Pink Palace, Publicity Accidents, and the 40D Legend. The camera finds her in pink, not the shy blush of a debutante, but pink as a religion. Carpeting, tub, telephone, a heart-shaped pool glittering like a valentine fallen to earth on sunset. She demanded a heart when she married a Mr. Universe. Then, she built one outside and another inside. A marble tub rimmed in gilt swans. In mid-century Los Angeles, where color is currency, Jayne Mansfield pays in fuchsia bills. The tabloids do the accounting. She is a woman who understands the arithmetic of attention. Fox has just christened her Marilyn Monroe, king-sized. Not a name so much as a marketing equation, the studio's way of scaring its absent star back to work and crowning a successor in the same sentence. Jayne smiles, then leans. The lens follows the line of her neckline as obediently as iron filings turn toward a magnet. Statistics, preachers complain from pulpits. Statistics. Editors cheer in morning meetings. The country, someone jokes, knows more about her numbers than it knows about commandments. That's the trick of the era. If they print a number, it becomes a fact. And if they print it twice, it becomes a legend. But numbers are slippery. Her 40D-21-36 is typed and retyped, even as pregnancies and nursing change her body, even as seamstresses let out or take in a whisper of satin before a premiere. Depending on the day, on the dress, on the arrangement between Jayne and the reporter, her bust balloons in print from a constant 40D in the 50s to a tabloid 46-DD scribbled in the summer of her last year. The truth is simpler and more human. Bodies move, headlines don't. She becomes the maestro of accidents. A strap slips at Romanoff's, a bus line trembles at the Tropicana. A backless gown dares gravity at a Beverly Hills welcome dinner where a young Italian starlet tries not to stare and fails, and a camera, never judgmental, simply records the hierarchy of attention at the table. The martini, the pearls, the cantilever of fame. Jayne knows her cues, hits her marks, and lets the world gasp on schedule. If the picture hints at a malfunction, the legend prints itself. At home, the Pink Palace turns publicity into architecture. The pool is a postcard. The bathrooms are a stage. The phone is a prop with its own punchline. Photographers are invited into the dream so often that the dream acquires a floor plan. A pink shag bath, a heart tub with gilded swans, Cupid's arrows filigreed into banisters. Every room an exclamation point. The house is a thesis statement in stucco. If you are going to be the queen of cleavage, build yourself a castle and make sure even the moat is heart-shaped. She is not naive about the economy of curves. Jayne is, in fact, a consummate businesswoman, a woman who licenses hot water bottles with her name, who signs novelty deals on the way to the studio, who understands that in a town where fantasy is product, a body can be packaging and enterprise both. The press writes about the silhouette. Jayne counts the residuals. The one thing she cannot control is how a silhouette becomes a sentence that follows her into every room. Even the audition rooms where a different actress might be invited to cry on cue, instead of breathe on cue. Here is the private ache. The more perfectly she delivers Jayne Mansfield, the harder it becomes to convince anyone that she might also deliver Jayne, actress. When she fights to turn left instead of right in a scene, she is fighting the gravitational pull of her own legend. When she takes a more serious role, the audience sneaks glances at the dress as if the dress has a speaking part. She knows this. She leans into comedy, winking at the joke the town keeps trying to make of her, and then she outwinks it, weaponizing the wink. It works, and it doesn't. There is a tenderness to her omnivorous optimism. She poses with her children like a starlit Sunday school teacher. She pinwheels between premieres, nightclub dates, county fairs, and charity balls with the momentum of someone sprinting ahead of a rumor. Inside the pink rooms, she plays records too loud and rehearses punchlines in the mirror. Outside, the industry assigns her a single note and congratulates itself for discovering melody. The contradiction becomes a life. Picture the finale the papers will write later: a highway in the dark, a truck, headlines that dish tragedy like dessert. But the house, the legend, the heart-shaped pool, they outlast the story that ended her. On warm days in Los Angeles, you can almost see the Valentine's outline in the air, a rumor of pink rippling where sunset curves. The myth of her biggest bust remains, cataloged in clippings, the reality of a woman who turned herself into an optical illusion and dared the world not to blink is what's left behind. Jane Russell's cantilevered controversy and code battles. Before there was Mansfield's Pink Empire or Monroe's mythic Wiggle, there was Jane Russell, the brunette who didn't need a scandal because Howard Hughes built one for her. She was 19 when he put her in The Outlaw, 1943. A Western with more bosom than bullets. Hughes, the aviator engineer turned film mogul, supposedly designed a special underwire bra for her, a contraption of steel rods and cantilever principles, the same way he once designed airplanes. It was the kind of publicity a studio couldn't buy, except Hughes didn't have to. The bra itself became a press release. Jane, years later, would tell anyone who asked, "I never wore the thing." She claimed it was uncomfortable, awkward, and utterly unnecessary. Instead, she relied on her own preferred brassiere, adjusted with tissue and straps for comfort, and let Hughes believe his engineering marvel was making history. What mattered wasn't the truth, it was the story. The story worked. Censors balked at the amount of exposure in The Outlaw, shelving it for years and forcing Hughes to wage a gleeful war with the Production Code Administration. While the moral watchdogs squinted at necklines, Hughes turned their outrage into advertising copy. Banned in Boston was as good as a premiere. Russell, meanwhile, found herself typecast as the screen's brunette siren, a woman who could smirk a line into innuendo and arch a brow that made the balcony seats blush. She was fully in on the joke. In interviews, she would say, "Publicity can be a gold mine, but you better be the one holding the shovel." Her bustline was measured, published, and republished until the numbers became part of her filmography. 38, 24, 36. They were printed so often they might as well have been her co-stars. Reporters asked her how she kept her figure. She'd grin and reply, "Pray hard." What set her apart was the combination of athletic posture, witty self-possession, and a refusal to let anyone else own her narrative. If they wanted her to be the woman in The Outlaw, she'd play it, but she'd also headline a comedy with Bob Hope, sing duets with the Ames brothers, and become a top-billed box office draw without ever pretending to be Marilyn. Russell understood the paradox. The same measurements that had launched her could also pin her in place. She could lean into the archetype when it suited her, like in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, where she played the knowing foil to Monroe's innocent bombshell. But she could also turn away from it, choosing projects that let her be funny, wry, even tough. What she left behind wasn't just a legend of curves defying gravity. It was a masterclass in keeping control when the camera, the public, and your own boss are all trying to claim credit for your silhouette. Russell didn't just survive the Golden Age's fixation on bust size, she outlasted it. Proof that the sharpest asset in Hollywood wasn't a number, it was knowing how to cash it in before it defined you forever. Marilyn Monroe's mythic measurements, labels, and the price of desire. If Jane Russell was the smirk, Marilyn Monroe was the sigh. Hollywood, and history, remembers her as the quintessential blonde bombshell. But Marilyn's bustiness was as much a carefully composed illusion as her platinum hair. In studio files, in fan magazines, in whispered boasts from wardrobe girls, her numbers were printed and reprinted: 36, 24, 34. But the truth was more mercurial. Garments preserved in archives tell a subtler story. Dresses tailored to a 35-inch bust, costumes padded or nipped depending on the role, and vintage sizing that would warp our modern sense of scale. A 1950s size 12, for example, bears little resemblance to the one hanging in department stores today, a fact lost on columnists eager to pin Marilyn down with a tape measure. She understood the choreography of curves. In Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, the gowns clung like liquid metal. In The 7-Year Itch, the halter dress carved shadows across her décolletage. On the red carpet, she favored bias cuts that moved with her hips, giving the illusion of a more generous bust than nature alone had provided. Marilyn didn't so much have measurements as she played them, like a saxophonist coaxing a new note from the same brass. Her publicity team knew the value of that illusion. They fed the press idealized numbers, always the same, always perfect, even when pregnancy, weight fluctuation, or corsetry told a different tale. The mythic Marilyn was unchanging, while the real Norma Jean was in constant motion. And yet, that static perfection came at a cost. Monroe was a dedicated student of acting, a woman who studied at the actor's studio, who fought for complex roles, who craved respect as an artist. But the public's appetite for her was inseparable from the image of the softly laughing, low-cut dress-wearing goddess. Directors lit her chest as much as her face. Journalists asked more about her undergarments than her process. She learned to weaponize the stereotype, playing dumb with such precision that she practically invented the modern archetype of the knowing ingenue. But she couldn't always escape it. The biggest thing she left behind wasn't just the bustline that launched 1,000 parodies. It was the proof that you could own your image and still be trapped inside it. In her later photographs, the ones shot quietly by friends without studio lighting, the glamour softens. There's a warmth in her posture, a vulnerability in the eyes, a reminder that Marilyn Monroe was a role Norma Jean played until the curtain refused to rise again. What the world kept was a number, stitched into fan memory like a label. What she left behind was an image so powerful, it blurred the line between the woman and the measurements forever. Mamie Van Doren's 3 M's, rivalry, rock and roll, and self-reinvention. By the late 1950s, Hollywood's casting department seemed to have discovered a formula, and Mamie Van Doren knew the math. The town had crowned its 2 reigning blonde bombshells, Marilyn Monroe and Jayne Mansfield, and Universal Pictures wanted a 3rd to complete the set. Thus was born the publicity moniker, the 3 M's, Marilyn, Jayne, and Mamie, a holy trinity of curves, smiles, and scandal. Mamie's bustline, variously reported as 38 inches, became her ticket into the club. But unlike Marilyn's sigh or Jayne's engineered accidents, Mamie's appeal was brassy, electric, almost feral. She didn't just smolder, she prowled. Universal slotted her into rock and roll B-movies before the ink on her studio contract was dry. Untamed Youth, High School Confidential, lurid titles for lurid posters, the kind where the headline shouted "buxom blonde" before it mentioned the plot. And Mamie leaned in, co-starring with teen idols, grinding through musical numbers, delivering double entendres like she was passing out cigarettes. Her figure was the first thing the studio sold, but Mamie herself was a far sharper operator than the press clippings suggested. She managed her own image, cultivating pin-up shoots that pushed just to the edge of what censors allowed, all while staying in the gossip columns through romances with athletes, rock stars, and fellow actors. Her bust became shorthand for her brand, a visual cue the moment she walked into a room, and she wore that cue like armor. Yet, there was also a curse in the crown of the 3 M's. By grouping her with Monroe and Mansfield, the industry made her an echo before she could be a melody. The public saw a type, not a person, and offers reflected that. Scripts demanded she stand still and look explosive. Lines were optional. Mamie refused to retire into cliché. When the studio system that made her collapsed in the 60s, she pivoted, singing in nightclubs, posing for bold photo spreads and eventually writing a tell-all memoir that proved her wit was as sharp as her silhouette. She kept her image alive on her own terms, decades after the marquee lights went dark for her contemporaries. What she left behind wasn't just the gloss of another busty blonde in a tight dress. It was the proof that you could take the most one-dimensional role Hollywood had to offer and stretch it into a lifetime of reinvention, and that a figure could be both your calling card and your shield if you were savvy enough to use it. Sophia Loren's side-eye night, tailoring, and Roman gravitas. If America exported the blonde bombshell, Italy returned fire with Sophia Loren, statuesque, smoldering, and wrapped in couture that knew how to whisper more than shout. By 1957, Loren was already a European sensation, freshly arrived in Hollywood to film The Pride and the Passion. Paramount threw her a welcome dinner at Romanoff's in Beverly Hills, a glittering affair packed with press, producers, and co-stars. The wine flowed, the flashbulbs popped, and then Jayne Mansfield arrived, late, deliberately, and dressed in a gown that seemed one wrong breath away from becoming tomorrow's front page. Loren, seated beside her, turned her head and looked, not down, not away, but directly, the kind of sideways glance that could launch 1,000 captions. The photograph, snapped in the instant between astonishment and amusement, became one of the most reprinted images of the decade. Mansfield's bustline was on full display, teetering at the brink of gravity. Loren's expression said everything without uttering a syllable. Sophia later claimed she was terrified there would be a spill, that her gaze was purely defensive. But the image became a cultural Rorschach test. Was she judging, admiring, competing, or simply surviving the spectacle? In truth, Loren's own figure was the product of careful tailoring and European dressmaking traditions that sculpted the bustline into a kind of architectural marvel, emphasis without excess, suggestion without surrender. Unlike Hollywood's engineered accidents, Loren's style was a slow burn. Her gowns, often by Emilio Schuberth, were cut to cradle her curves without giving away the store. A square neckline here, a strategic dart there. The craftsmanship drew the eye, then held it. She didn't need to announce measurements. She let the drape and silhouette do the arithmetic. In the male-dominated machinery of 1950s cinema, Loren wielded her allure as both bait and boundary. She could play the earthy peasant girl in Two Women or the glamorous seductress in Arabesque, and in both cases, the bustline was a supporting player. Present, undeniable, but never the whole plot. What she left behind wasn't just that side-eye photo, though it remains immortal. It was the lesson that power could reside in restraint, and that a glance, framed just right, could make more headlines than an entire dress. Anita Ekberg's Trevi baptism, tabloid bursts, and Batjack beginnings. Anita Ekberg didn't just walk into Hollywood. She strode in like a Valkyrie. Crowned Miss Sweden in 1950, she was soon flown to America under a studio beauty contract with John Wayne's Batjack Productions. The early roles were bit parts, the kind of decorative assignments given to any starlet with cheekbones and a figure. But Ekberg's figure, widely publicized at 40-22-36, was no ordinary decoration. It was a showpiece that demanded its own billing. She moved through the decade in a blur of publicity stunts, posing with lions, riding elephants, attending premieres in dresses that seemed designed to test the tensile strength of fabric. The tabloids ate it up, and Anita knew exactly what she was doing. Her smile suggested mischief. Her shoulders carried the confidence of someone aware the camera would follow her even if she said nothing at all. But it was 1960 that crowned her forever. Federico Fellini cast her in La Dolce Vita, and Anita gave the world its most famous midnight swim. In the scene, she wades into Rome's Trevi Fountain in a black, strapless gown, the water cascading over her shoulders, the fabric clinging in ways that made the censors twitch. Marcello Mastroianni follows her into the fountain, but in the cultural memory, he is an afterthought. The moment belongs to her, a baptism of cinematic immortality. That scene was sensual without being frantic, languid yet electric. The bustline, so often a tabloid headline, became something else entirely in Fellini's lens, a symbol of freedom, of abandon, of the decadent romantic Italy the world wanted to dream about. For once, Anita wasn't the punchline to a studio-engineered accident. She was the poem. Yet, like so many bombshells, She struggled to find roles that matched the moment. Hollywood loved her silhouette, but was less interested in exploring the actress inside it. She took work in Europe, appearing in adventure films, comedies, and occasional Hollywood returns. Through it all, the Trevi scene clung to her, a blessing and a shackle. What Anita left behind was more than a measurement. It was the memory of that moonlit Rome, the way her bustline ceased to be just a number and became a piece of cinema history, forever rippling in the fountain's current. Gina Lollobrigida's couture armor and the craft of emphasis. If Sophia Loren was the simmer, Gina Lollobrigida was the spark. In post-war Italy, Gina's rise paralleled the nation's own. Bold, confident, ready to reclaim the world's attention. A former art student and beauty queen, she entered films in the late 1940s and quickly became one of Europe's most bankable stars. Her bust line, reported in fan magazines as 38, 24, 37, became a point of fascination for the international press, though Gina herself preferred to talk about her work and her sculpting hobby. Her secret weapon wasn't shock value, it was couture. Designers like Emilio Schuberth, the tailor to the stars, understood that fabric could be armor. Schuberth's gowns for Lollobrigida were feats of engineering, structured bodices, strategic boning, and precise darts that lifted and framed without surrendering to vulgarity. In these dresses, Gina's bust was presented not as an accident or a provocation, but as a statement of craftsmanship and power. Hollywood noticed. She crossed the Atlantic for films like Trapeze, 1956 with Burt Lancaster and Tony Curtis, and Solomon and Sheba, 1959, opposite Yul Brynner. The costumes in these epics were less about subtlety. Plunging necklines, beaded brassieres, metallic lame that caught the light with every breath. But even then, she carried herself with a regality that kept the gaze firmly on her. Not just the garments. Off-screen, Gina proved herself as savvy as any studio publicist. She controlled her image tightly, giving photographers angles she approved of, dressing for effect without ceding the narrative to them. The press could gush about her figure, but Gina's interviews centered on her craft, her travels, and later her award-winning photojournalism. In an era when bust was often shorthand for spectacle, Lollobrigida's was an exclamation point on a sentence she wrote herself. She understood that allure could be tailored as sharply as a suit, and that a gown could be both shield and sword. What she left behind wasn't just a series of precise, elegant silhouettes. It was a blueprint for how a woman could let the world look without letting it define what they saw. Mae West's corseted hourglass, quips, and censors. Long before Marilyn, Jayne, Mamie, or Sophia ever stepped in front of a camera, Mae West was rewriting the rules of what a woman's body and her mouth could do on screen. She came to Hollywood in the early 1930s, already a sensation from Broadway, where her plays about sex and desire had drawn crowds and police raids in equal measure. By the time she made her first films, Mae was in her late 30s, an age when most actresses were quietly ushered toward character parts, but she had an arsenal, a razor wit, a walk that seemed to swing on its own rhythm, and a corseted bust line that defied both gravity and modesty. Her silhouette was as deliberate as her punchlines. Mae's costumes were feats of pre-code engineering, boned corsets that pinched her waist to a waspish span, bodices cut to cradle her bust like a spotlight. She once quipped, "I believe in censorship. I made a fortune out of it." And she meant it. Every time the Hays office wrinkled its brow at a neckline or a double entendre, it only added to the legend. She understood that allure was about more than showing flesh. It was about promise. The way she'd lean in, letting a gown's décolletage frame her face, made the audience lean too. You could measure her bust in inches, but the true measurement was in timing. The pause before a punchline, the glance held a beat too long. When the production code clamped down in 1934, Mae adapted. Her lines grew slyer, her costuming more suggestive than revealing, but the effect was the same. You left the theater convinced you'd seen more than you actually had. Even as younger bombshells took the screen in the decades that followed, they were all, knowingly or not, playing in a sandbox Mae had built. She never let the industry discard her. In the 1970s and her 80s, she made a flamboyant comeback in films like Myra Breckinridge, still corseted, still tossing off innuendo like confetti. The body had changed. The attitude never did. What Mae West left behind was more than a figure. She left a formula. Mix architectural costuming with linguistic seduction. Stir in a refusal to apologize, and serve with a wink. The Golden Age bombshells who followed wore the gowns, but Mae had stitched the pattern. The measure of a myth. In the end, the inches never told the whole story. Yes, the tape measures were real. Sometimes yanked tight in the back rooms of wardrobe departments, sometimes imagined entirely by columnists looking to fill an inch of copy. Yes, the dresses were cut to the millimeter. The straps stitched and restitched until they caught the light just so. But the most powerful bust lines of old Hollywood were never just anatomy. They were narratives. Jayne Mansfield built hers into a castle and made the swimming pool its heart. Jane Russell turned hers into a legal and publicity battle she could win with a grin. Marilyn Monroe let hers become the world's most famous optical illusion, even as she fought to be seen beyond it. Mamie Van Doren wore hers like a backstage pass to reinvention. Sophia Loren let a single glance do the talking. Anita Ekberg baptized hers in the Trevi Fountain. Gina Lollobrigida armored hers in couture, and Mae West corseted hers into architecture and quip. Each woman understood, consciously or by instinct, that Hollywood's obsession could be both leash and crown. Some played along, some fought, most did both. And when the lights dimmed, what remained wasn't the number on the paper, but the image they had shaped from it. The biggest wasn't in inches. It was in the size of the story. Stories that still ripple through the decades like reflections on the surface of a heart-shaped pool. Stories that remind us curves can be measured in more than one way. In the arc of a career, the bend of a headline, the shape of a life lived under the gaze of 1,000 eyes. Old Hollywood left many myths behind. These women became the myths, and then somehow, the myths became them. And somewhere between the truth and the legend lies the secret they all knew. You can measure a body, but you can never quite measure a presence. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment down below as it helps support this channel. Also, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our newest videos. Thanks for watching.